Russia prepares for a major drone attack. Officials are alerted. Trump's support for Ukraine remains unclear. Today we discuss key issues with Roman Svitan. Roman, welcome and thank you. Wishing everyone good health. Now to our audience. Like this video to support Roman Svitan's analytics. Write your opinion about the topics we will discuss during the broadcast. It is important for the promotion of the video, and it is interesting to know where you are watching us from, your cities and countries. Roman, let's start with the fact that the day before, the U.S. Special Envoy Keith Kellogg arrived in Kyiv. Roman, meetings of this level are mostly non-public, as many details are not officially disclosed. What do you think is the purpose of Kellogg's visit to Ukraine? Earlier he visited Belarus, and now he is coming to Kyiv. What are your expectations? What do you know, and what do you think he talked about with representatives of the Ukrainian authorities? For the last few months, Kellogg has been discussing mechanisms for Ukraine's surrender. Nothing new. The Istanbul meeting, the contact with Lukashenko, everything is the same as before. It is called a process directed against Ukraine. Having gathered information, he came to promote the surrender mechanism. Does he represent something different? They continue to promote the same objective, cessation of hostilities while maintaining Russia's control over the occupied territories, which in fact means handing over more than a fifth of the country and millions of citizens under occupation. He came for the sole purpose of promoting the surrender issue because he has no other authority. As special representative, he has no authority to decide military or other key issues. We have heard nothing from him but attempts to lobby for a surrender mechanism. There has not been a single initiative from him that could contribute to restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity, reaching the state border, or imposing reparations on Russia. Instead, he has been pushing capitulation, cessation of hostilities, and the de facto loss of some territory. The visit clearly does not bode well. Roman, let's move on to Trump's statements, because now the US president spoke at a briefing and made a number of important statements. Despite numerous discussions, missiles continue to fly towards Kyiv and claim the lives of civilians. This is what Trump was talking about. How do you perceive such statements? In your opinion, is it worth taking them seriously, given that his position often changes? What do you think the words about talks and promises mean? Trump is surrounded predominantly by Middle East-oriented representatives, primarily focused on Israel's interests. He solves the problems of this region in favor of Israel, using Ukraine as a tool to pressure Putin to make concessions on Iran, Palestine, the Houthis, and other issues. So far, the current administration that came to the White House with Trump is focused on Middle Eastern issues, primarily in the interests of Israel. Its rhetoric may be useful only in the short term, to pressure Putin and advance American goals in the region. However, as long as this Israel-centric team remains in power, no systemic changes are expected for Ukraine. The best option would be to replace incumbent figures with those who worked with Trump in his first administration and performed specific tasks in the White House. Pompeo, Bolton, and Walton Keel have provided effective support, with one of them now representing interests in the U.S. Congress. They continue to promote mechanisms to pressure Russia, including initiatives in international assemblies, which is also important for Ukraine. All this is seen as using Ukraine as a tool to put pressure on Putin to solve Middle Eastern problems. To avoid disappointment, one should not harbor unnecessary expectations. The maximum that can be obtained is 1 or 2 decisive steps if Trump really wants to punish Putin. We cannot count on more than that. Deliveries remain sporadic with no system in place. Once Putin satisfies Trump's Middle East interests, Ukraine may again drop off his radar. Roman, we have a statement from US President Trump saying that billions of dollars in military weapons will be promptly funded by NATO and distributed to the front line in Ukraine. Trump has voiced that right now. What do you think this means? To what extent is this a positive signal for Ukraine? Should we expect real action in the near future, or are we back to the topic of loud promises without specifics? This already concerns the topics that are really important to us and are the most effective. It is possible to obtain American arms in this format, through Trump's economic and business interests, as well as through the interests of American arms manufacturers. It is the interests of U.S. arms manufacturers that will help provide the front with the necessary weapons at the current stage, before Europe and Ukraine have fully launched their own production cycles. This mechanism is working, and Trump's business approach, as we have already discussed, can give Ukraine the space to receive American arms in the necessary volumes. European and Ukrainian funding, including joint initiatives, could be supplemented by future reparations from Russia. The most effective solution would be a lend-lease, like the $500 billion Pompeo proposed last year. This is a reason to keep a close eye on his possible return to the administration and to prepare in advance for such a development. A sensible solution would be to use Russian funds to cover the costs of fighting and rebuilding the destroyed Ukrainian infrastructure, which has been damaged almost everywhere. This approach looks reasonable and effective. It is in this direction that we can expect significant shifts, and with Trump's appropriate rhetoric and actions, it is reasonable to support such initiatives. Roman, the President of the United States, said that Ukraine feels strong. There were some interesting theses about armaments. I propose to consider them in detail, because earlier Trump announced his intention to transfer APCs and relevant missiles to Ukraine, citing information from Reuters. The US President has said that Ukraine is likely to receive a larger military aid package in the near future. Mr. Roman, what armaments do you think are meant, and what can the world expect in this context? We look forward to your analysis. God forbid that we, with our current power, go down the same path that Trump is leading America down. It is a backward movement that creates more problems than it does good. Trump's recent actions have harmed the interests of Americans, instead of making the country stronger. We don't need that kind of direction. I've already talked about actions. All that remains for now is rhetoric, and that's what we're talking about now. Trump's statements in and of themselves mean nothing. The best test of his intentions is actual arms deliveries. If they start to arrive, especially modern ones, it will be a tangible signal. At the very least, we should count on the return of equipment from Arkansas. Ukraine now has about 50 HIMARS installations, which work effectively thanks to German support. Supplies of M30 and M31 missiles made in the US, but transferred from Albendisware warehouses. These systems are performing well. However, ATACMS missiles lack the necessary range. The M30 flies at 85-86 kilometers, and Ukraine needs at least 300. The appearance of ATACMS will be an obvious sign of Trump's involvement. Real engagement matters more than rhetoric. The key is HIMARS with PRSM missiles replacing ATACMS. capable of striking up to 500 kilometers, even reaching Moscow. If ballistics start hitting Moscow, that will be the real sign of a true shift in course.
Вот это как раз вариант. То есть, как только баллистика, выпущенная с Хаммерсов, начнет заходить на Москву, это считайте, это как раз вот эти ПРСМ нам передали.
New missiles have only been arriving in the US military for the past year, but there is a possibility of several dozen units being transferred to Ukraine, in the context of Trump's changed rhetoric. The main thing Ukraine has long been waiting for is the delivery of US F-16 aircraft. The main armament for these aircraft is the JASSM cruise missile, capable of hitting targets at a distance of 350, 370 to 950, 980 kilometers. In fact, different types of missiles have different ranges, and this will be immediately apparent. In the context of Trump's changed rhetoric, I would like to see three specific items: JASSM cruise missiles for F-16s, missiles for HIMARS, either PRSM or at least 8 ACMS with a range of 300 kilometers to be able to reach targets like the Kolin, which they are now trying to neutralize. Roman, you have already mentioned missiles. Let's focus on the details. Recently, the Western press reported that Trump is considering transferring long-range JASSM missiles with a range of up to 1,000 kilometers to Ukraine. What do you know about their technical characteristics? To what extent can such weapons become a deterrent for Russia? What is the significance of the 1,000-kilometer range for Ukraine? What military facilities could fall within its range? How do you think Putin might react to this?
Куди можемо цілити, і як, на вашу думку, може реагувати на це російський диктатор Путін?
Cruise missiles are a convenient target for air defense systems focused on intercepting airborne objects. The JASSM is a subsonic missile, and for air defense it is a low-speed target, unlike supersonic missiles, which are more difficult to detect and intercept. Do not be under any illusions. Although such missiles can put pressure on Russian air defenses and strike military targets, they are not a universal solution or a key factor in turning the tide. This will expand our capabilities, especially in the context of using F-16s and increasing the range of their missions. To overcome the Russian air defense system in critical areas, it is necessary to use ballistic missiles, since almost all Russian air defense systems are capable of effectively intercepting cruise missiles. Sufficient air defense density practically nullifies the effectiveness of this type of missile. In order to achieve results, they will have to be used either in combination, or as a pressure tool, or in a massive salvo. It is a massive strike on a single point that can break through any air defense system. Some of the missiles will certainly reach the target and fulfill the combat mission. If we take the range from 350-370 kilometers, this already covers cross-border territories, including the outer borders of the Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, Voronezh, and Rostov regions. In some cases, the range allows targets to be reached even on the territory of the Kuban. Even a basic JASSM missile with a range of 370 kilometers can cover the entire Crimea and reach the Kerch Bridge. When used en masse, especially in combination with AGM-160 missiles, jamming and combined attacks, such strikes can successfully accomplish the combat mission at critical points in the region. These missiles aren't a game-changer or universal solution, just one important tool, especially for long-range targets. If the number of missiles is sufficient, their increased range, more than 500 kilometers, will make it possible to hit targets in Moscow, Engels, where a key Russian strategic aviation base is located, and Mozdok. In some cases, it will be possible to reach targets at a distance of about 1,000 kilometers, which covers the North Caucasus. A kill radius of 1,000 kilometers opens up the possibility of performing a combat mission even from the St. Petersburg area. It all depends on the number of munitions. A single launch of a JASSM cruise missile may be more of a simulation intended for informational effect than for real tactical results. Each military target requires about 10 missiles to penetrate defenses and compensate for interception losses. In Crimea, there are approximately 150 such targets, which would require about 1,500 missiles for this region alone. The figures are impressive. The scale of military operations directly depends on the amount of weaponry, and this should be clearly understood. Roman, we have another important announcement from US President Trump. 17 Patriot systems are being prepared for shipment to Ukraine. This is not about facilities, but about placing a significant number of systems directly on the battlefield. Trump confirmed this publicly. How do you assess this information? The figure of 17 Patriot systems looks significant. Do you agree that this is a significant military support for Ukraine? What does this mean in practice? How realistic is it that in the near future these systems will appear on the front line and defend Ukrainian cities? What is your analysis of such statements? Technically, the US could supply up to 100 systems from stockpiles, CNO expansion, THAAD, and Aegis integration. Deliveries may range from 17 to 40 plus. The main challenge is staffing. Each system reportedly requires up to 90 personnel. Clarifying what counts as a system is key. We need to understand what Trump means by system. It could be a single launcher with control and navigation aids, or it could be full batteries, which are also considered Patriot systems. In this, he may not be entirely accurate. Nevertheless, even the delivery of 2 Patriot batteries would already strengthen us on a number of fronts. Now it is extremely important to ensure the protection of settlements with a high concentration of citizens, primarily regional centers. Odessa, Sumy, Kharkiv, Kherson, Mykolaiv, as well as Zaporizhzhia, Dnipro, Poltava. Practically all major cities continue to suffer from strikes. Even 17 defense systems are objectively insufficient to cover all needs. About 50 Patriot systems are needed to reliably cover Ukraine's key infrastructure facilities. This is a significant number of both batteries and missiles, including PIK-2 and PIK-3. The total need is estimated at thousands of units, which requires serious financial investments. It is necessary to operate with concrete figures, because the information from Trump is not quite correct. It is important to be clear about what exactly is meant by the term system. Perhaps we are talking about 2 Patriot batteries and no more. Roman, Trump said that after his phone call with Putin, which he called wonderful, missiles flew at Kiev, and he concluded that words don't matter. To what extent does that signal a change in his rhetoric? Do you really think Trump has realized that it is impossible to negotiate with Putin? How would you assess such statements? Russia faces challenges that Putin is unable to solve, especially in the context of the Middle East. It is not a question of unwillingness, but of inability to act effectively. His dismissive attitude toward Iran and his attempts to barter the Iranian position in favor of Ukraine have provoked a negative reaction from Tehran. Now there is serious opposition to Russian initiatives to restore influence and manage processes in the region.
Иранцам это не понравилось. И сейчас серьезное противодействие есть российским попыткам опять восстановить какие-то отношения, поуправлять процессами на Ближнем Востоке.
Obviously, Trump bet on Putin and actually promised him a part of Ukraine's territory. His actions are aimed at the complete transfer of the occupied regions under Russian control, which is already obvious to many. The rhetoric broadcast within the SKLG is also oriented towards this. Their goal is to hand over the occupied part of Ukraine to Russia, yet Putin himself is incapable of realizing this goal. Putin is not capable of solving the situation in the Middle East. Iran has taken a tough stance and continues to resist because it perceived Russia's actions as unacceptable. Persian civilization goes back thousands of years, while Putin's foreign policy goes back only a few hundred. This poses serious challenges for the Kremlin, and under the current circumstances, Putin has no clear plan of action. Trump's response to what is happening in Ukraine is formal and not backed by a real understanding of the situation. He shows concern about strikes on Ukraine without having a clear idea of its geographical location. Even basic details can be explained by his entourage. This creates a serious problem of perception of his pressure on Putin. As soon as a new agreement or other issue is reached between them, the rhetoric on Ukraine could instantly change. We will get nothing, and what was handed over can also be taken away, explaining that it is necessary in the Middle East. This creates the conditions under which Putin once again has the opportunity to expand his aggression against Ukraine. Don't be under any illusions. The disappointment could be much more painful. Ukraine needs to develop its own ballistic capabilities to retaliate against Moscow in the event of further aggression. A strike on the Kremlin backed by Patriot systems could help defend against ballistic and civilian target attacks. Ukraine needs its own cruise missiles, possibly with partners like Germany. Domestic alternatives, like a Taras instead of Taurus, can be developed and adapted if needed. Ukraine must prepare and activate its own military reserve to rotate AFU soldiers in their fourth year of service. This critical step can't be delayed in hopes of outside help. Trump may say one thing today, forget it tomorrow, and act differently the next. Ukraine must learn from past experience. Share your thoughts on Trump's statements right now. Write your emotions, impressions, and stance in the comments. This is important for the promotion of the video, so separately support it with a like. Don't forget Roman Svitan's analysis. Roman, we also have an important statement from NATO Secretary General Rutte. 100,000 Russian troops have been killed on the battlefield since the beginning of January. How do you feel about these statistics? Is it correct to say that 100,000 Russian military personnel have been killed in the war since the beginning of January? How do you assess these figures, because war is math? To what extent do you agree with the NATO Secretary General's statement? The main goal of any defending army is to destroy advancing enemy forces. Liberating territory follows naturally from this. If large enemy concentrations, like 700,000 troops, are crushed, territory will be regained even without major offensives. This reflects the basic logic of military operations. From this position, even in defense mode, it is possible to liberate territories, not advancing on the ground, but eliminating the enemy where he makes contact. If the enemy does not make contact, he should be hit with long-range weapons. 100,000 destroyed in 6 months is a realistic working figure, confirming the effectiveness of this strategy. The real losses are much higher than officially recorded, since the partners only take into account confirmed cases. Many categories of losses are simply not included in the statistics, although as a result, hundreds of thousands of Russian servicemen are actually withdrawn from the battlefield. The Russian army has suffered direct and indirect losses, showing the effectiveness of its destruction. Liberating occupied territories is a natural outcome. Ukraine is reducing its own losses through various means, especially with active use of drones. The Magyar unit shows particularly strong progress.
Этим сейчас, кстати, занимаются наши силы беспилотных систем. Мадяр очень хорошую показывает сейчас динамику.
Ukrainian unmanned systems destroy more than 100 Russian servicemen every day, not counting losses of equipment, ammunition, warehouses, control systems, and command centers. This kill zone approach allows them to focus on the main task of eliminating the Russian army. This leads to victory while reducing losses among Ukrainian personnel. Roman, the Western press reported that Putin plans to complete the occupation of Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions within the next 2 months. How do you assess such intentions? This information was voiced by Putin to Trump the day before. Mr. Roman, given the statements we have already discussed at the beginning of the stream, how do you perceive these materials and publications of the Western press? How well-founded are the assumptions about Putin's ambitions? Is their realization possible under the conditions we have now? This is not just Putin's ambition, it's part of the Russian constitution, which includes 5 Ukrainian regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, Kherson, and Crimea. Russia is legally obliged to control these territories regardless of international reaction. For about 2 years, the focus has been solely on these strategic goals. The seizure of Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkiv is just a distraction. Ukrainian forces were pushed out of the last populated area they controlled in Luhansk, Belogorivka, toward Rihorivka. The region is effectively lost. The remaining kilometers no longer matter. Thus, one of Putin's goals was achieved with tacit consent. Ukrainian authorities neglected Luhansk, focusing on Sumy and creating an information frenzy exceeding even FSB operations. Loud claims circulated about Russian troops advancing toward Kyiv through Sumy, Peryatin, Priluki, Basan, Novobykov, and Brovary. The Eastern Front remained critical, but attention shifted elsewhere. Amid the excitement, the Verkhovna Rada ignored the Russian offensive despite repeated warnings. It seems the handover of Luhansk to Russia was agreed and carried out without real resistance. Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia are next in Russia's campaign. The left bank of Kherson is under Russian control, but they lack forces to cross the right bank this year. Any attempt would likely be pushed back. The main goal in Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia is expanding the land corridor, Russia's key objective. Expansion of the land corridor to 120-160 kilometers remains the goal of the Russian side, but its realization is unlikely. The main reason is the lack of resources and forces, even taking into account the second offensive wave they are trying to form. The enemy may advance 1.2 kilometer max, possibly toward northern Zaporizhzhia. Intense pressure is seen near Boley Polya, Spolog, and from Makachevska through Rabotino, Vasilyevka, Kamenskoye toward Orekov. Offensive activity is steady. Holding Zaporizhzhia railway roads is critical. Russia is preparing for a second offensive wave in August-September. Localized enemy advances are possible but depend on Ukraine's timely deployment of law enforcement and rotation of forces. If security forces aren't deployed soon, it will look like a surrender of Donbas. Promises to Abramovich and Bennett about handing over Crimea and Donbas seem fulfilled. Russia gained a land corridor and part of Zaporizhzhia. This shows clear inaction by the authorities. Roman, thanks for the talk and clear analysis. Roman Svitan, Reserve Colonel, answers key questions daily. Vladyslav Solovyov was with you. Friends, please like to spread Roman's insights.
Прямо зараз ставте цьому відео лайк для підтримки аналітика Романа Світана, бо лише так це відео традиційно подивиться якомога більше людей.
Write what you think about US President Trump's statements on the transfer of Patriot to Ukraine, other weapons, and his position on Putin. It is important. We are waiting for your comments, opinions, emotions, and impressions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and see you on air on 24.